Welcome to another deep dive.
Oh, this can be a good one.
You guys sent over a ton of sources on eco-spirituality
Mhm.
from all over the world.
It's amazing stuff.
So
Yeah.
get ready to explore
Yeah.
how different cultures see that connection
hmm
between spirituality and nature.
I think you're going to be amazed by how many common threads we find.
Okay.
Even though these traditions are separated by,
Yeah.
huge distances and totally different cultures.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Okay.
We've got sources on indigenous cultures,
Right.
Eastern philosophies,
hmm
African and Afro-diasporic traditions,
Yes.
Celtic and European practices,
Uh-huh.
and even some contemporary green faith movements.
It's a lot.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
But where should we even begin?
Well, a good place to start might be by looking at what many indigenous cultures believe.
Okay.
The sources you provided really emphasize that for a lot of these groups.
Yeah.
Nature isn't just seen as a resource to use,
Right.
but as something that's alive.
Yep.
Like every element,
Wow.
from the tiniest plant to a huge mountain,
Yeah.
has a spirit.
So instead of seeing humans as separate from nature, it's more like we're all part of one big,
Exactly.
living, breathing thing. That's a pretty amazing concept.
Yeah. And this idea of interconnectedness leads
Yeah.
to a really deep respect
Okay.
for the balance of nature.
Okay, so how does that respect actually play out in their daily lives?
It's woven into pretty much every aspect of their culture,
Wow.
from their ceremonies and storytelling
Oh.
to their rituals and everyday practices.
Got it.
Everything seems to revolve around keeping that harmony with the earth. For example, your sources mention the Navajo Blessing Way ceremony.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
Vaguely, but I definitely need a refresher.
Well, it's a really powerful ceremony.
Okay.
The way it works is
Yeah.
if something happens that disrupts that balance and interconnectedness with nature,
Mm-hmm.
the Navajo people will perform this ceremony to try and restore it.
So it's not just about asking for forgiveness.
No, it's not just about asking for forgiveness.
Wow.
It's more about recognizing that humans are a part of nature.
Right.
And when we do something harmful, it throws everything off.
It's more like taking responsibility and actively trying to heal that relationship, right?
Exactly.
That's a really powerful concept.
It is.
And speaking of powerful, I was reading about how many indigenous peoples consider the land itself
Oh,
to
yeah.
be like a sacred text.
Beautiful way to think about it.
It's like their history, their wisdom, their spirituality is all embedded in the landscape.
It's a beautiful way to think about it, isn't it?
It is.
Imagine walking through the forest,
Yeah.
and instead of just seeing trees and rocks, you're
Mm.
seeing a living record of your ancestors,
Wow.
a source of spiritual guidance.
That's a completely different way of experiencing the world.
It is.
Wow, it really is. Okay, that's a pretty amazing start to our deep dive.
It is.
But we've got so much more ground to cover.
We did.
What about Eastern philosophies? They seem to have a completely different take on things, right?
They do, but there are some interesting connections, too.
Okay.
Take Buddhism, for example.
Okay.
One of the core concepts is something called pratityasamutpada,
Okay.
which basically means that all life is interconnected.
Okay.
Everything depends on everything else.
So it's similar to that indigenous idea of humans being part of nature,
Yes.
not separate from it.
There's definitely a resonance there.
Okay.
And this idea leads to some pretty powerful principles,
Okay.
like ahimsa, which means nonviolence towards all forms of life.
So it's not just about being kind to other people,
Right.
but to every living thing on the planet.
Exactly.
Animals, plants, insects, everything.
It encourages a really deep mindfulness and compassion
Wow.
that extends to the entire natural world.
That's a pretty high bar.
Huh?
But what about Hinduism? I know they have a ton of gods and goddesses.
They do?
Do any of them represent nature?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
In Hinduism, many deities are actually personifications of natural elements.
Okay.
Like, you have Ganga, the goddess of the sacred river Ganges,
Right.
who represents purity and life-giving waters.
Okay.
And then you have Agni, the god of fire,
Right.
who represents transformation and purification.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Fire can be destructive,
Yeah.
but it can also be really powerful and cleansing.
For sure.
It's kind of like nature itself, right? It
Yeah.
can be both gentle and fierce.
Exactly. And a lot of Hindu festivals,
Oh, wow.
like Diwali and Holi,
Yeah.
are centered around celebrating these natural elements and recognizing their power and importance.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Hinduism, even though it's very different from indigenous cultures,
Yeah,
also weaves a lot of spiritual meaning into nature.
definitely.
But what about Taoism? I don't know that much about it.
Taoism is really interesting. It
Huh.
focuses on trying to understand the Tao,
Okay.
which is the force that flows through all of life. And the way they do that is by observing nature
Okay.
instead of trying to control nature.
Right.
Taoists believe in learning from it, adapting to it, and finding harmony within its rhythms.
So instead of being the masters of the universe, it's more about recognizing that we're just one small part of a
Exactly.
much bigger system.
It's about recognizing that we are part of nature,
Right.
not separate from it.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
The way water flows or
Yeah.
the way plants grow and change with the seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Taoism encourages us to study these patterns in nature and apply that wisdom to our own lives.
That's a really beautiful idea.
It is.
It's like nature's a wise teacher
Yes.
if we're willing to listen.
And that idea of nature as a teacher is something we see in a lot of different cultures.
Okay.
It's a common thread that runs through many eco-spiritual traditions.
Okay, we've touched on indigenous traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism. That's a lot of ground covered already. But I'm curious to hear about how African and Afro-diasporic traditions view nature.
Yeah.
They seem to have such a strong connection to their ancestors and the spiritual world.
They do, and nature plays a huge role in that.
Okay.
In many African spiritual traditions, the natural world is seen as this sacred space,
Okay.
a place where ancestral spirits and divine energy reside.
So it's not just about the physical environment, it's about the spiritual energy
Exactly.
that's woven into it.
Trees, animals, rivers, mountains, they all hold deep spiritual significance.
Wow.
And it's not just about respecting them, it's about honoring and protecting them because they are seen as vessels of the divine.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like they see the divine in everything around them.
Yes, and that reverence for nature is reflected in so many of their practices and beliefs.
Okay.
Your sources mention Yoruba spirituality, for example.
Right.
It's a great example of how African traditions connect the divine to the natural world.
Right. I remember reading something about Yoruba deities being linked to specific elements of nature.
Exactly. They have what they call orishas,
Okay.
who are like deities that embody different forces of nature.
Got it.
For example, Oshun is the goddess of rivers,
Right.
and she represents love, beauty, and fertility.
Okay.
And Shango is the god of thunder and lightning,
Wow.
representing strength, power, and justice.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
It's like they see the personality of nature
Uh-huh.
reflected in these deities.
Exactly.
But this isn't just limited to Africa, right?
Right.
I mean, these beliefs traveled with the African diaspora all over the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's really powerful is that they carried that deep reverence for nature with them.
Right.
So even in places like the Caribbean and the Americas,
Right.
where African people were forcibly displaced,
Yeah.
their spiritual traditions and that deep connection to the natural world survived and thrived.
Oh, yeah.
Religions like Santeria and Vodou are great examples of that.
Right. I remember reading about Haitian voodoo
Yes.
and how they honor these spirits called Loa.
Hmm.
And a lot of their rituals
Yeah.
take place in natural settings,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
by rivers or under trees.
That's a beautiful testament to how eco-spirituality can act as this cultural bridge.
Yeah.
It connects people to their ancestral heritage
Right.
and to the earth itself,
Wow.
even in the face of incredible hardship and displacement.
It really is amazing how these traditions have endured and adapted over time.
It is.
It makes you wonder if there's something innate in us,
I think so.
this need to connect with nature on a deeper level.
It's a question worth considering, for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of different culture,
Yeah.
we can't forget about Celtic and European traditions.
Yeah, that's true.
They have a really fascinating perspective on eco-spirituality as well.
We were talking about indigenous cultures and Eastern philosophies.
Mm.
But Europe has its own rich history of spiritual practices.
Yes.
And many of them are deeply rooted in nature.
Right.
So what can you tell us about Celtic traditions?
Well, Celtic spirituality has this deep reverence for the natural world.
Okay.
They see trees, rivers, stones, even entire landscapes
Wow.
as sacred entities imbued with spiritual power.
So for them, it's not just about the beauty of nature.
No.
It's about the power and energy
Right.
they believe exists within it.
They had this concept of sacred geography,
Okay.
where certain places, like groves of trees or particular hills or springs,
Okay.
were considered to be especially potent.
Right.
Like they had a stronger connection to the divine.
So they literally saw the landscape as alive with
Well,
spiritual energy.
And a lot of these traditions are still alive today,
Wow.
especially in places like Ireland, Scotland, and Wales.
Okay.
A lot of their folk customs, and seasonal festivals are still rooted in that deep connection to nature.
It's fascinating how these ancient beliefs continue to shape cultures,
It is.
even in the modern world.
And it's not just limited to Celtic traditions.
Okay.
We're also seeing a resurgence of paganism and Wicca.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
Which are modern spiritual practices that also emphasize a really strong connection to nature.
What's their take on eco-spirituality?
Well, they're all about celebrating the Earth's cycles.
Okay.
And aligning their lives with the seasons.
Got it.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all living things.
Right.
And honoring nature as a source of spiritual wisdom and power.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of pagans and Wiccans actually practice their rituals outdoors.
Oh, wow.
Immersing themselves in the elements as a way to connect with the divine.
So for them, it's not just an intellectual understanding.
No.
It's about directly experiencing that connection with nature.
Exactly.
Feeling the Earth's energy.
Yes.
And finding spiritual meaning within that.
And that's a theme we see popping up again and again in eco-spirituality. It's not just about believing in something, it's about experiencing it.
Right.
About finding ways to connect with nature on a deeper, more visceral level.
This has been an incredible journey so far.
It has.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
We've explored Indigenous traditions, Eastern philosophies, African and Afro-diasporic beliefs, and even Celtic and European practices.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that despite their differences, they all seem to share this common thread, this deep respect and reverence for the natural world.
You're absolutely right.
It really is.
And what's even more fascinating is that this reverence for nature isn't just something from the past.
Right.
It's actually experiencing a resurgence in the modern world, too.
Oh, you mean those green faith movements we were talking about earlier?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're seeing this really interesting blend of ancient wisdom and modern environmental consciousness emerging.
Right.
And it's happening across a variety of faiths.
Okay, I'm really curious to hear more about that.
Okay.
What are some examples of how this is playing out?
Well, one prominent example is Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si.
Okay.
It's a document where he calls on Catholics to protect what he calls our common home, the earth.
So it's like he's saying that caring for the environment is a spiritual duty.
Exactly.
Not just a political or social responsibility.
And we're seeing similar trends in other faiths, too.
Cool.
For example, Sufism,
Right.
which is an Islamic mystical tradition,
Okay.
teaches that respecting nature is a way of expressing your devotion to the divine.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you see the divine in all of creation, then wouldn't you naturally want to protect it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some Sufi practices even incorporate meditation in nature
Wow.
as a way to connect with God.
I love that. It's such a beautiful reminder that our spiritual practices can and should be intertwined with our relationship to the earth.
For sure.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've journeyed from the Americas to Asia, Africa, and Europe.
It's been a world tour.
And what's striking is that across all these diverse cultures and spiritual traditions, there's this deep recognition of the sacredness of nature.
You're absolutely right.
It really is.
It's a powerful message that resonates across time and cultures.
It makes me wonder, how do we bring that awareness into our own lives?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one we'll definitely explore further. It seems like we're seeing this global shift in consciousness.
Yeah.
A reawakening to the spiritual importance of caring for the earth.
Right.
It's like work coming full circle, rediscovering the wisdom of those ancient traditions that saw humans as an integral part of nature, not separate from it.
It's so inspiring to see how these different threads are weaving together in the modern world.
It is.
But what I'm really curious about is how does this actually translate into action?
Right.
I mean, does having these eco-spiritual beliefs actually lead to more sustainable practices?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And thankfully, your research included some studies that have looked into exactly that.
Oh, wow.
Anthropologists studying eco-spirituality have actually noticed that cultures with strong eco-spiritual roots often have more sustainable practices.
That makes a lot of sense. If you see nature as sacred, as a source of life and spiritual sustenance,
exactly,
wouldn't you be more inclined to protect it?
Precisely.
Yeah.
It becomes less about following external rules and regulations and more about an intrinsic motivation to care for something that is deeply valued and respected.
It's like that saying.
Yeah.
We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children.
Right.
If we actually see the earth as sacred, as something we're responsible for, we're more likely to act as stewards for future generations.
That's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a crucial lesson for us today, especially as we face the very real challenges of climate change and environmental degradation.
Maybe by rekindling that sense of spiritual connection to the earth, we can unlock a new wave of environmental action.
Yes.
When it's driven by a deeper sense of purpose and responsibility.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our relationship with nature is not just about survival.
Right.
It's about something much deeper.
Yeah.
It's about the soul.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
It's not just about protecting the environment.
Right.
It's about reconnecting with something that's essential to our well-being as humans.
Yes, and I think that's a perfect segue to start wrapping up our deep dive into eco-spirituality. We've explored so many fascinating perspectives, from indigenous wisdom to Eastern philosophies, African traditions, Celtic beliefs, and even modern green faith movements.
Wow.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And I have to say, I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for how diverse and yet interconnected these beliefs are.
Me too.
Yeah.
What really stood out to me is that despite their differences in practices and beliefs, they all seem to converge on this core understanding.
Okay.
We are not separate from nature.
Right.
We are interwoven with it, both physically and spiritually.
It's not just an abstract idea.
It's not.
It's a lived reality for so many cultures around the world.
It is.
It's woven into their rituals, their stories, their very way of life.
And that's what makes it so compelling, isn't it?
It is.
It's not just about believing in a concept.
Right.
It's about embodying that connection in a real, tangible way.
It's about finding ways to honor that interconnectedness in our daily lives.
Yes.
And it seems like these eco-spiritual traditions offer a pathway to do just that.
They do.
They give us concrete practices and ways of thinking
Exactly.
that can help us shift our perspective and deepen our relationship with nature.
You're absolutely right. Many of these traditions emphasize practices like mindfulness, gratitude, and reciprocity in our relationship with nature.
It's like shifting from a consumer mindset
Right.
to a mindset of reverence and caretaking.
Exactly.
Instead of just taking from the earth,
Yeah.
we're invited to give back, to nurture it,
Yeah.
to appreciate its gifts.
It's about recognizing that we are part of nature,
Right.
not separate from it,
Yeah.
and that recognizing that interconnectedness is not just a philosophical concept.
Right.
It's a call to action.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's a call to reconsider our relationship with the earth, to move from exploitation to reciprocity,
Yes.
from apathy to reverence.
And maybe, just maybe,
Yeah.
if enough of us heed that call, we can create a more sustainable and harmonious future
Right.
for ourselves and for generations to come.
Wow. It feels like we've been on this incredible journey
I know, right?
around the world,
Yeah.
exploring all these different ways of seeing nature as something sacred, from the indigenous traditions of the Americas to the ancient philosophies of the East,
Yeah.
the vibrant spirituality of Africa and the African diaspora, the mystical beliefs of the Celts,
Yeah.
and even the way modern faiths are embracing environmentalism. It's been mind-blowing.
It has been quite a journey.
It really have.
And yet, I think we've uncovered something truly profound.
Okay.
Amidst all this incredible diversity, there's a unifying thread,
Okay.
a shared recognition that we are connected to the earth
Right.
in a way that's much deeper than just the physical.
It's a reminder that caring for the planet isn't just a political issue or a scientific imperative.
Right.
It's something deeply personal and spiritual.
It's about reconnecting with that sense of wonder and awe that so many cultures have held for the natural world.
And that's what I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive.
Me too.
It's an invitation to explore their own unique connection with nature.
Yeah. To find ways to cultivate that sense of reverence and reciprocity in their own lives.
Exactly.
After diving into all these fascinating perspectives, what resonates most with you?
Oh, that's a good question.
What new ways might you find to honor and connect with nature in your own life?
I think for me, it's about those small moments.
Okay.
Maybe it's about spending more time in nature, practicing mindfulness outdoors,
Right.
or simply being more conscious of your impact on the environment.
It could be as simple as taking a moment each day to appreciate the beauty of the natural world around you.
Absolutely.
To feel the wind on your face, the sun on your skin,
Yeah.
to listen to the bird song,
Those small moments of connection can have a profound impact on our well-being and our sense of belonging in the world.
It's about remembering that we're not just visitors on this planet.
Right.
We're part of its intricate web of life.
And when we nurture that connection, we nurture ourselves.
Yeah.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
It has.
And I think it's a perfect note to end on.
If we all rekindled that sense of spiritual connection to the earth, if we started seeing ourselves as part of nature rather than separate from it, could that be the key to a more sustainable future?
A future where we live in greater harmony with the planet and with each other.
It's a question worth pondering.
It certainly is. Yeah. And on that note, we'll leave you with that final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into eco-spirituality across cultures.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, may you find your own sacred connection to the earth.